Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Mad Hatter Radio, reporting live from the Devil's Playground. In this go around, I want to talk about Black Panther and his Oscar nomination. So, really quick, to start things off, I do want to say that personally, I think that the movie was overrated. Just in terms of getting the nomination for Best Picture, cinematography wise, directing wise, acting wise, I don't think it deserves that just on those factors alone. I think there are other factors that might allow it to win Best Picture or that make it make sense to me, but I'll get into that later. But before I get into that, I do want to say a lot of people have been losing their minds over something that most people shouldn't even care about. People shouldn't even care about the Oscars and Hollywood, everything that's going on in Hollywood. We should be taking a step back from that. But what this reminds me of is not all white people, but there's a good segment of white people that when they look at black people, for instance, and they think of affirmative action, which I'm not necessarily in favor of. But when they look at affirmative action, first off, they act like it doesn't affect white women and help white women more so than others. But they think that the only factor in affirmative action is race. It doesn't matter your academics, extracurricular activities, your community, the work that you did in the community. None of that matters, or even your test taking skills. They just think that race is the only thing that matters. And this is very interesting because it reminds me of Black Panther and the Oscar nomination. It's almost like I feel there's a little bit of this sense of this black movie is doing so good. Doesn't mean it's a great movie, I'll admit that, but because it's getting such a great reception and so successful, I feel like people are upset about that, and they think that the only reason why it's successful is because it's black people and race is the only thing that matters. But obviously, just like affirmative action, and again, not saying I'm in favor of this, but just like affirmative action, race is not the only thing to be considered. There's other factors. And obviously in this nomination, it wasn't just race, there's other factors. But these people who are losing their minds over this, in particular white people and people who have a European way of thinking, they're not looking at things from a complex perspective. They see things literally in black and white, ironically, actually. They don't see the complexities of life. Because a lot of these people who are critiquing this, to be honest, are simple-minded. So let me get into why I think that there are some reasons that, first off, why I think that this movie got some recognition and why it should be recognized. And then I'm going to get into some of the arguments that people have. And then I'm going to have a rebuttal for each of those arguments. So most people, and I get it, we live in a world where it's very easy to be hyperbolic. And you take things to the extreme because people want to get clicks. So everyone's either going to say this movie was super duper amazing or it super duper sucked. But I tend to fall somewhere in the middle. But reasons why I think that this movie was more complex than people think, I'm going to give you those reasons. One of the reasons why I think the movie is more complex and why it was potentially, why it was nominated for Best Picture for the Oscars is they show the complexities of African Americans versus Africans. And this is to the argument that people have that the movie was weak or it sucked. It was just terrible. So this movie really touched on a very sensitive issue in the black community where, talking about the African diaspora, there's this perception where African Americans feel as though like Africans don't have our backs. Like it's almost like they left us. And then there's this perception that Africans have is that they don't like us because they think that like we are giving them a bad name or we're not educated or whatever. It's almost like the bastard child. So there is a complex relationship with black people in America and Africa, and it touches on that. I think that's a really interesting perspective that I think is really risky for Disney to do. They also talk about family connections and breaking cycles. Like for instance, T'Challa, T'Chaka's father was very isolationist. And this even goes into what's happening today when, like, at the time when or at the time he was candidate Trump, when he was running for president, he was pushing isolationism. He's a far cry from that now, but he was pushing that. And in the movie, T'Chaka actually wanted Wakanda to be kind of its own country and cut off from the rest of the world. He very much believed in doing for his people first, which is, I think, is really interesting. It's like, it makes you think, like, hey, if Hollywood and these people in Marvel are supposed to be these super liberal people, they're actually picking up kind of a conservative belief, and vice versa. So T'Chaka wanted to keep Wakanda like as its own country and be isolated. T'Challa comes in and he sees the issues that this created. Essentially, this isolationism perspective created Killmonger. So it makes you think of the positives and the benefits to this type of, political strategy, this geopolitical strategy. And it talks about breaking family cycles, which is extremely important in today's world because we are all carrying the baggage of our ancestors. And so that's another interesting perspective I thought the movie talked about. And so a lot of people will say that, like, again, this movie's stupid, I don't get it, it's dumb. And this just goes to show why we do need some diversity in media and in different things. It doesn't mean it has to be all black or all white or this or that. It just means we need to have inclusion of all races. And this is why we need inclusion, because there's so many people who are like, I don't see, this movie had no effect on me. But for a lot of people, it did. And for a lot of people of all different races, it did. It was a cultural phenomenon to a certain extent. So there's that.